may choke somebody, stand still.
Let's talk about the timeline, or what we call the distance continuum. I like to start out the worst case scenario with our students. Basically, when they're first learning the principles of self-defense, I like to start out in the worst case scenario, meaning they're already caught, right? Their hands are already around the throat. The arm is already around the neck. They're wrapped up in a bear hug situation already. And how do you deal with that situation from that worst case scenario where you're really and truly caught off guard? But we also have to talk about in later videos and later instruction is all the things that we can do to prevent putting ourselves in that situation. And that is situational awareness. We're gonna have a huge program on situational awareness, how you can build that, things you can do to heighten your awareness when you're out in everyday life. The second thing is using my environment to aid in my situation, using common objects, using cover, things that barriers I can put between me and my attacker, and movement. We talk about movement in our basic Krav Maga fundamentals of punching, kicking, all that stuff. Movement is life. So all those things are things we need to work on and train on to prevent the worst case scenario. But ultimately, if we are stuck in that situation where we're truly caught off guard, we need to be able to use these same defenses in those worst case scenarios. I acknowledge the fact that, yeah, I may have a good choke or bear hug defense, but I don't want to put that to the test. If I see the hands coming at me and I catch it, moving offline or using my inside defenses or my 360 defenses, along with head movement and footwork to avoid those hands coming at me and then attacking and getting off the X, those are things that we definitely want to train on. But again, we're going to circle back to the basic foundation, using these principles when all those options are no longer available to us and we're caught in that worst case scenario.
All right, so we're starting off with choke from the front with our two-hand pluck. Let's talk about how to make this exercise work. So, principles in Krav Maga, when the hands are put on my throat, and I'm not saying this is the most common attack on the street, but this helps us start working on that plucking principle. So here's the threat. His hands are around my throat. What makes the choke happen is these thumbs. So what I want to do is address the immediate danger with my pluck. So to make a pluck, my thumb fortified on the pointer finger, I make a hook in my hand. The strongest part of my pluck is the palm heel area, and then this entire area here is acceptable to make my pluck with. I don't want to pluck with the fingertips because there's no margin for error, because if they slip, there's nothing to support it. So I like to go in with the palm heel because it's much stronger. It's supported by my wrist, and if I slip, and most likely I will, under stress, sweat, blood, I have the rest of my hand as a fail-safe. So when I mean attack the attack or attack the immediate threat, if I remove the thumbs in the moment, the choke is no longer a threat. And because he's committed two hands to make this, he's exposed himself, so I'm utilizing my kick to the groin so I can add that simultaneous counterattack. So it's defend and attack at the same time. One of the main Krav Maga principles you'll see over and over again. So nice and slow, we'll do that again. So I'm gonna dive into this hole right here. I'm gonna use the palm heel of my hand and I'm gonna run this wrist and forearm area as almost like a guide or a runway directly to the thumbs. Another principle we're gonna address is I'm gonna pluck 90 degrees to the thumbs. So 90 degrees in this case is roughly to the rear. So when I dive in with my hooks, I wanna pluck straight back. And what's good about that is that my elbows and arms and shoulders work good that way. I get my chest out and my shoulders back, utilizing my lats, my back muscles. I don't go directly to the thumbs because I want to gain a little bit of speed, because that speed is going to be the equalizer. The difference between him choking me, if I were to come up, natural reaction is to try to pry the hands off my throat. Right? That's my instinctual reaction. So I'm building that defense around something I'm normally going to do without any training, but instead of grabbing with my thumb and trying to pull, that's going to be constant pressure. And because he's much stronger and bigger than me, he can adapt to my constant pressure and overwhelm me with his strength. So instead of constant pressure, I'm going to use that speed, that explosiveness, boom, because in that moment, he can't make the adjustment to counteract that energy that's hitting those thumbs. These guys' hands are on my throat. What I want to just point out is that the hands don't need to fly off the throat or the neck. All I need to do, because when he's pressing in with his thumbs, that's where the pain is. I'm plucking the thumbs. As long as the thumbs come just off a couple inches, the choke defense is made. right? And then the kick to the groin is what takes care of the rest. The hands don't need to fly off. In fact, chances are they're not going to. But the more energy, right, he puts into choking the life out of me and pressing his thumbs there, the more energy that's here, the more energy gets released, the more aggressive I go against the thumbs with my pluck. So let's talk about all the principles we covered already. Making a simultaneous defense and a counterattack. We're going to go over that in more detail. Speed, explosiveness. So I'm not grabbing the hands or the wrists and trying to pry them apart. That's a strength exercise. So, and I'm going to lose it every time. So I'm using that speed, that explosiveness, 90-degree pluck against the thumbs, which is going to be to the rear, utilizing my full range of motion with my body mechanics. So let's put that together. So as soon as I feel the choke come on, he's squeezing, boom, I'm diving in and making that pluck. Again, making my hooks nice and strong, attacking the thumbs with the palm heel of my hand, boom, and plucking to the rear. Okay, one more time, nice and slow. Again, I don't like to go straight to the thumbs because there's not a lot of space to work with here. I'm going to dive in roughly about halfway on his forearm and slide, use his forearm as a guide, because if I run this forearm towards the thumbs, I'm always going to hit those thumbs. I'm always going to latch onto those thumbs, and I'm going to rip them off to the rear as fast and as explosively as I can. At the same time, if we look down towards my leg, because he's using both of his hands here, he has to be somewhat based to have a strong choke. So whether one foot is in front of the other or he's in more of a passive stance, there's always going to be that opening for my leg to rip up the center. And I'm just letting that leg rise up, knee hip rotation, and he's going to get some part of that shin as I rise up. And what this is doing is taking him off the attack, boom. He gets a strike to the groin, I'm disrupting his OODA loop, so in that instant, his mind is on defense. His mind is on, I'm being attacked. Maybe there's pain, maybe there's no pain, but he feels something. It takes his mind off the moment, and then I capitalize on that by continuing to flood that space with aggressive attacks, all right? So from here, I make the defense and attack right off the bat. I have somewhat of control over his hands, but from here, I'm just gonna ride those hands in with my elbows. Maybe I come in for my cross-body control, whatever the situation dictates. I'm gonna use my combatives, put the threat down, and get away safely whenever I possibly can. Nobody, when they choke somebody, stands still, right? We're doing this to teach the principle, to teach the technique. If he wants to choke the life out of me, what is he gonna do? All his energy is gonna be driving me. He may drive me up against a wall, up against a car, because he wants to have that stability to make this choke even that much more devastating. He wants to put me out as quickly as he can. Driving me back is because he's putting all his energy here, and his energy comes from the floor. He doesn't put his hands on my throat and stop with his forward energy just to choke me out, right? So as he's starting to push me back, I can still make this exercise, right? If he's driving me back, that's a different story. We got to talk about our balance. But just with that forward energy that he gives me, I don't keep driving me. I don't need to adjust my defense, right, to make this work. A lot of you have seen the Krav Maga turning defense. There's a kind of a time where you have to decide, do I still do the pluck or do I transition to the turning defense? And really what's going to determine that later on, as we show you, is how much you're being pushed off balance. If I'm being driven back to the point where I can't get my base, I have no balance, it's going to be very, very hard for me to do this. My natural reaction is, when my body's off balance, is my hands go up in the air. Again, which is why we have the turning defense. It's built around our body's natural reaction to what's being forced upon us. Now, if my training partner, who obviously doesn't want to hurt me, goes to do the choke, but instead of putting that energy into the hands to really restrict blood flow and to take my air away from me, if he pretends to do that, but really just flexes his muscles here, and I go to release what I think the energy is here in the thumbs, but in fact the energy is here, the hands are not going to come off. Right? And if you go home to your loved one or friend, they're gonna probably do the same exact thing. And if they don't, and they truly, truly try to put that choke on you, and you've only had a couple lessons, there's a chance that you're probably not gonna, not necessarily survive, but make a good defense, because one, you weren't prepared for your friend to do something like that. You're not prepared to kick him in the groin, and most likely you weren't going 100%. So save the practice for in the classroom, make sure that you become a good partner, right? So when Jake is choking me, he doesn't have to choke the life out of me, but he's gonna start by gradually bringing his hands together, and you notice the change in my voice. So relax a little bit. I'm gonna start talking, and he's gonna gradually bring his hands together and squeeze stronger and stronger. And then all of a sudden now I feel a little bit of loss in blood flow. That's not dangerous to do in the classroom, but what it does is it prepares me to get a sense of what it feels like to truly be choked. And then all of a sudden, as he starts squeezing, keep going, then I have a sense of urgency. And that actually helps me defend much better and get to that higher level of proficiency in a much shorter time, because he's put my body in almost that fight or flight position, right? Because I truly am losing oxygen, losing blood flow, because he's gently and gradually squeezing, right? And each time I do that, I'm gonna have my partner, or actually I'm gonna wait longer and longer. His job is to start from my shoulders, right? Work his way in, and his job is to keep squeezing. And then when I don't like the way that feels anymore, that's when I make my defense. So now I'm truly training from that position of disadvantage where I'm caught off guard, I'm about to go out, then I gotta make that defense. And all of a sudden you can hear the change in my voice because he's gradually constricting my airway, and that's gonna create that sense of urgency. Common questions that I hear all the time and I get asked is, why not, if he's just choking me, why not attack? Why not kick the vulnerable target? Wouldn't that be a much simpler way to address that attack? And the answer is no. One doesn't work without the other. If he's choking me and all of a sudden I start punching him in the face, what do you think he's gonna do? He's gonna tuck his chin, right? Protect his face, and maybe he abandons the choke, but he continues on the attack, right? He continues to attack, or he chokes harder. I wanna time the defense with the counterattack as close to one another as I possibly can. But if I'm gonna have one lead the way, it's gonna be the hands to the pluck, because ultimately speaking, if he choke me, I can remove the choke without the kick, but I can't remove the choke with the kick without the pluck. I gotta relieve that pressure because seconds count. He's got all that pressure on my windpipe, he's cutting off the blood supply, he's taking my airway away from me, and if I don't address that, I can, well, first of all, my life would be over. He crushes my windpipe and I fall to the ground, and then I have no way to defend myself. So I wanna try to get there as fast as I can and then have my attack get there as quickly as possible. And going back to what I said earlier, if we don't hit somebody sooner than later, we're doing nothing to disrupt their OODA loop or take their mind off the attack and put it on the defense. They have to switch gears to give me that opportunity to overwhelm them with other attacks and potentially get away safely.